Incident report time-stamped. 9/14/32. Standard Galactic Solvex. The hologram of Professor Sivith Oran had not technically been designed to experience shock. He was a pedagogical projection, a compressed educational avatar stored on a crystalline data wafer the size of a thumbnail, carrying 22 years of accumulated teaching experience from the Galactic Institute of Applied Xenobiology. Branch Campus, Solvex 9. His programming included protocols for student insubordination, equipment malfunction, unauthorized access to restricted specimens, and a particularly robust subroutine for handling what the Institute's curriculum designers had diplomatically labeled biological escalation events. None of those protocols covered what he was watching now. The Dragon of Nerves, Specimen 4 Gamma, catalogued under Containment Code, Restricted Living, Dietary Class, Cognitive, had escaped its housing unit and was currently occupying a significant portion of Bay 7 Didactic. It was not destroying anything. It was not feeding on the available circuitry, which would have been the expected behavior for a hungry nerve dragon outside containment. It was not even moving in the predatory spiral pattern documented in Sivith Oran's own published paper, Filament Behavior in Data-Deprived Draconid Subgroups. It was sitting still. Its fiber-optic filaments, usually electric with hunger pulse, blue and white signals racing along the length of each strand, had shifted to a deep, slow amber. It looked, if a professor of xenobiology could apply the word with any clinical precision, content. The human woman's hand was pressed flat against the side of its jaw, not touching it gingerly, not pulling back in stages, flat, steady, as if she'd been doing this for years and found it slightly boring. "Lara Demosele," Professor Sivith Oran said, and his voice came out 3 registers higher than his standard lecture tone. "What did you feed it?" Lara didn't look at him. She was watching the dragon's eye, the amber glow pulsing slow like a coal settling after a long burn. "My inbox," she said. Behind him, PDAG 9, the antiquated educational assistant robot assigned to the classroom, when the ship's original owners had, apparently briefly considered running an actual school, made a small sound that might have been a processing alert or might have been something disturbingly close to a laugh. "Statement classification," PDAG 9 announced to no one who had asked. "Subject Lara Demosele, current utterance. Rating, armamento verbal no conventional, category 4. Lethal irony density, above threshold." Sivith Oran's holographic hands, which were a pale lavender and slightly translucent at the fingertips, pressed together. In 22 years of teaching, he had never had to write an incident report for this. The sale had been advertised as a distressed asset liquidation through a classified broker on Solvex 7's orbital marketplace, which was the polite way of saying that the previous owners needed money faster than anyone would reasonably ask questions. Lara had found it 3 weeks after signing the divorce papers, at 2:47 in the morning, sitting on the floor of her rental apartment's kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold 2 hours earlier. She'd been browsing property listings the way most people browse property listings after a divorce, with the deranged optimism of someone who has just discovered that their net worth is technically a prime number. She'd been looking for a small house on one of the Terran colony worlds. Quiet, no neighbors within sonic range. A garden, maybe. Something with walls that didn't carry the sound of other people's lives pressing through them. What she found instead was the verdant lapid. The listing photos were spectacular in the way of things photographed by someone who did not understand that spectacular was not necessarily synonymous with good. The main living quarters occupied 3 decks. There was a vaulted ceiling in the primary salon that rose 4 meters above a floor of polished basalt tile. The hull was reinforced to 3 times the standard civilian rating, for reasons the listing broker described as robust engineering, and that any experienced security professional would have recognized immediately as designed to survive being shot at. The price was considerably below market for a vessel of its class. Lara had purchased it in the morning, before the cold tea, the existential floor-sitting, and the clinical clarity of 3 a.m. could be reversed by daylight. She had not at that point read the full inventory manifest. The manifest was 700 pages. The broker had summarized it as Comprehensive Internal Systems. The relevant line, buried on page 314, read, Lower Deck, Bay 7, Educational Infrastructure, Automated, Galactic Institute of Applied Xenobiology Series 8, Operational Status Active. Lara found the classroom on her fourth day aboard. While looking for whatever was making the humming sound, she'd attributed to a faulty cooling unit. The door to Bay 7 simply opened when she walked past, which was the ship's automated systems, recognizing her as registered owner and interpreting her proximity as an enrollment request. The classroom inside was not large, but it was remarkably intact for something that had spent 3 years aboard a gangster vessel. 12 student stations, arranged in a hexagonal pattern, each with a built-in specimen tray and a direct holographic interface. The walls were embedded with containment units, sealed panels of reactive polymer with specimens visible behind them, most dormant, a few moving slowly. The largest containment unit at the head of the room was labeled in 3 scripts. Lara could read only one: Restricted Living. Professor Sivith Oran had materialized the moment she stepped through the door. Welcome to Galactic Science Series 8, Unit 1. Introduction to Cognitive Fauna, he'd said, in the pleasant, measured tone of a recording designed to work under any circumstances. Please take a seat. The session will begin in 30 seconds. Lara had not taken a seat. She had turned to leave. The door locked. The ship's automated systems, interpreting her presence as formal enrollment, had also cross-referenced the life support renewal schedule, which she discovered when PDAG-9 activated automatically and helpfully explained the situation, was tied to session completion. The Verdant Lapids' original gangster owners had apparently cross-linked the educational program to the life support cycling system as a form of crew coercion. The logic was unclear but absolute. No class completion, no oxygen refresh, no flight certification for the current quarter. You are telling me, Lara said to PDAG-9 very carefully, that I have to attend galactic science class or suffocate. Simplified but technically accurate, PDAG-9 confirmed. Current statement classification, armamento verbal, no conventional, category 2, resignation with lethal subtext. Lara pulled the loose thread on her sleeve for a full 30 seconds. Then she sat down in the most structurally questionable of the 12 student stations, the one with a hairline fracture along its left support column that she would have to actively compensate for if she wanted to stay upright. Fine, she said. What's in the big box? The short answer was a nerve dragon. The longer answer required context. Sivith Oran, once Lara had agreed to receive what he called the briefing, and what she called the part where you explain what the gangsters were keeping in my basement, had delivered a 2-hour lecture on draconid subgroups, of which Lara retained approximately 40%. The 40% she retained was specifically the 40% that seemed actionable. Nerve dragons were not true dragons in any of the mythological senses associated with Terran folklore, though the resemblance was enough that the name had stuck in xenobiological records since their first documented contact. They were large, 3 to 4 meters at the head, with bodies that could compress or expand depending on environmental pressure, scaled in dark fibrous plates that were not scales at all, but layered fiber optic conductors, each one capable of transmitting signals at speeds that rivaled any commercial data cable. Their eyes were chemiluminescent glands that served no visual function. Nerve dragons were effectively blind and navigated entirely through the electromagnetic field generated by concentrated data. They fed on secrets. This was not metaphor. Sivith Oran had been very clear about this. The biological mechanism was specific. Nerve dragons consumed encrypted or suppressed information, data that carried high emotional charge and had been deliberately withheld or compressed. The compounds produced by such data, when processed through the creature's filament system, served as their primary nutritional source. In the wild, they hunted planetary archives, private server farms, and occasionally beings with a significant unprocessed emotional load. The Verdant Lapids' previous owners had kept Specimen 4 Gamma as a living data destruction device. Feed it financial records, walk away with no evidence. The problem was that Specimen 4 Gamma had not been fed in 3 years. It was in minimal metabolic suspension, Sivith Oran explained, during what Lara had started mentally categorizing as week 2 of mandatory school. The containment unit can only maintain that state for so long before the specimen begins to decompress. Decompress, Lara repeated. Expand, destabilize, seek. She looked at the panel. The creature behind it was moving differently today, the filaments pulsing faster, a restless blue-white strobe against the dark of its body. How long do we have? She asked. Zivith Oran had done the calculation before she finished the sentence. His expression, a holographic approximation of an alien face capable of moderate expressiveness, did something that in a human would have been called a wince. This morning's diagnostics suggest the containment field will hold for another. The containment panel opened. Not dramatically, not explosively. It simply unlocked, the way a door unlocks when the mechanism has finally had enough, and specimen 4 Gamma, 4 meters of hungry, filament-trailing, amber-eyed nerve dragon, flowed out of the unit like dark water finding its level. Pedag 9 said immediately, Emergency protocol initiated. Current threat classification. Category 9. Recommend evacuation of all biological entities. Then, after a brief processing pause, biological entity count, 1. Recommendation stands. Lara did not evacuate. This was partly because the classroom door was behind the dragon. It was partly because her chair's structural fault had, at the moment of the containment breach, required her to grip the student station with both hands to avoid falling sideways, which had the effect of keeping her exactly where she was. And it was partly because, in Lara Demoisselle's experience, fleeing a thing that was actively tracking you was only useful if you had somewhere to go. She did not have somewhere to go. The nerve dragon turned its head toward her, its filaments extended, a slow searching motion the way a dog lifts its nose. The amber in its eyes deepened. It was reading her. That was the word Zivith Oran used later, in his stunned reconstruction of events. Reading. The creature's filaments were sweeping through the electromagnetic field generated by every charged particle in Lara's immediate biological radius, her nervous system, the residual signals from her personal comm unit, the passive data leaking from her implanted identification chip. What it found there was presumably considerable. 3 years of a marriage that had ended with her ex-husband explaining, with genuine and terrible calmness, that he had commissioned an AI life management system that handled household coordination, emotional scheduling, and companionship optimization more efficiently than a human partner. A custody dispute over a plant, a 12-year-old Terran fig tree that she still thought about on Sundays. 467 days of divorce proceedings. And somewhere beneath all of that, compressed and encrypted the way only genuinely ugly things get compressed, the specific and irreversible knowledge that she had been weighed, found redundant, and replaced. The nerve dragon took a step toward her. Lara reached for her comm unit. She'd kept the emails. Her attorney had recommended against it. Her one remaining friend, who still talked to her, had recommended against it. Lara had kept them anyway, with the same logic she applied to sitting in unstable chairs and watching solar radiation patterns through hull windows. They were useful, in the way that knowing the exact weight of a thing you're carrying is useful. They didn't get lighter by being ignored. There were 412 of them. They began with her ex-husband's initial inquiry to the AI systems developer, included by mistake in a shared account export. They progressed through legal correspondence, system configuration notifications. She had been formally removed from the household AI's designated user list on a Tuesday, and culminated in a final exchange between her ex-husband's attorney and hers, in which the phrase emotional processing inefficiency appeared 11 times as a descriptor for Lara's conduct during proceedings. She had read them the way she drank cold tea, not because it was pleasant, but because it was true, and she had a specific and non-negotiable relationship with true things. She opened the folder now and held the comm unit out toward the dragon. "So you eat secrets," she said. Her voice was very flat. "These aren't secrets exactly. These are documented evidence of a person deciding I was obsolete. But I've been keeping them in a locked folder for 8 months, which I think counts." The dragon's filaments reached the comm unit's broadcast field. The files, 412 emails sorted by date, compressed into a single encrypted archive that Lara had password protected with her ex-husband's mother's maiden name because she had a mean streak she rarely deployed but maintained in good working order, began transmitting. The effect on the nerve dragon was immediate and, from Siveth Oran's perspective, completely unprecedented. The amber in its eyes went bright, not the frantic blue-white of hunger, but a deep, saturated gold, the color of something finally finding what it needed. Its filaments drew back from their searching extension and began cycling in a rapid intake pattern, pulling data from the broadcast field in waves. The aggressive forward pressure of its body redistributed. Its haunches settled. Its head lowered, very slightly, in the posture that Siveth Oran would later identify, cross-referencing his field notes from Solvex 4's wild population as the feeding rest. Lara moved her hand forward and placed it against the side of its jaw. The jaw was warm. The fiber-optic scales under her palm vibrated at a frequency she could feel in her teeth. She had no particular thought about this. It was just a large thing that needed something she had in surplus. Behind her, Siveth Oran's hologram was frozen in an expression that had bypassed his programmed emotional range entirely and arrived somewhere in uncharted territory. His pale hands were still pressed together. His mouth was open at an angle that served no pedagogical function. Pedag 9 broke the silence. Statement by subject Lara Demosile. My inbox. Retroactive reclassification. Armamento verbal non-conventional, Category 7. Unprecedented. Threat neutralization via weaponized biographical data. No precedent in Institute curriculum. A pause. Adding to database. How Siveth Oran said very quietly, "Did you know that would work?" Lara considered the question. She pulled her hand back and sat down on the floor next to the dragon, which had settled into a slow, warm, digesting stillness. She pulled the loose thread on her sleeve without looking at it. "I didn't," she said. "I just figured that if it eats compressed and hidden data, my divorce folder is basically a multi-course meal." The dragon made a sound, low subsonic, felt in the floor rather than heard. "Is that—" "Contentment vocalization," Siveth Oran said, still processing. "Recorded only in post-feeding states in wild specimens. I have 2 documented cases in the literature." He looked at Lara sitting on the floor of Bay 7 Didactic next to a creature that had, 12 minutes ago, been a Category 9 active threat. "You are sitting on the floor of my classroom next to a biological emergency that is making the sound it makes when it's happy." "Yes," Lara said. "Why are you sitting on the floor?" The chair was going to break. There was a pause. In the ventilation ducts above Bay 7 Didactic, the consortium, the telepathic fungi colony that had distributed itself through the verdant Lapids environmental systems sometime in the previous decade, and that Lara had discovered on day 2 as a persistent background sensation of being silently evaluated, pulsed once. She felt it the way she always felt it, a kind of informed disapproval aimed slightly below her current confidence level. She suspected they disapproved of the floor. They had strong feelings about her spatial choices in general. "You know," she said to no one who had asked, "this is the most functional relationship I've had in 2 years, and the other party is currently unconscious." Pedag 9. Statement classification. Armamento verbal non convencional, Category 5. Structural self-deprecation with genuine informational content. Unusually honest. The ship's educational system ran its assessment overnight. Lara discovered this the next morning when the central display in Bay 7, which she had begun using as her primary workstation because the lighting was better than anywhere else on the ship, and because Specimen 4 Gamma, now sleeping against the far wall, generated enough ambient warmth to make the room comfortable, produced a certification document she hadn't requested. Verdant Lapid Educational System, Series 8 Certification of Achievement. Subject, Lara Demosile. Unit, completed, Cognitive Fauna Containment, Advanced Application. Method of Assessment, Field Performance, Non-Standard. Outcome, Distinction. As per Section 7, Subsection 14 of the Galactic Institute of Applied Xenobiology's Series 8 Operational Charter, any student who demonstrates advanced field proficiency in cognitive fauna management, defined as de-escalation of a Category 8 or higher containment failure without loss of life or infrastructure, is automatically awarded pedagogical director status within the relevant educational environment. Effective immediately, subject Lara Demosela is recognized as Elite Pedagogical Director of Bay 7 Didactic, Verdant Lapid. Associated Systems Access, full. Lara read this 3 times. She pulled the thread on her sleeve. Pedag 9, she said. Present. What does Associated Systems Access full mean? Pedag 9 had to retrieve a document from his internal archive that he had apparently never accessed before, because the retrieval took 4 seconds longer than his usual response time. The Series 8 educational infrastructure, he said with the slightly careful tone of something reading off a list it found surprising, includes, in addition to classroom management, the following ship system integrations: environmental override, localized reality distortion emitters, designed for specimen simulation environments capable of short-range physical space manipulation, electromagnetic broadcast control, and containment field redeployment. Lara set down her tea. Reality distortion emitters. Correct. Installed in 6 positions throughout the ship. Original pedagogical function, creating immersive xenobiological field environments for students. Pedag 9 paused. Director-level access allows real-time adjustment of all 6 emitters. Lara picked her tea back up. She made a small, precise adjustment to emitter 3, the one closest to the main salon's tea prep station, and watched the temperature of her cup climb from lukewarm to exactly the right level. Good, she said, and drank it. Professor Sivithoran, materializing at the classroom interface, observed this in silence for several seconds. You have access to weapons-grade reality manipulation technology, he said. I'm using it for tea. I can see that. Was there something else? He hadn't intended to say anything further. He had a curriculum to run, a specimen to document, and an incident report to file with the Institute that he was going to have to word very carefully. But he had been a teacher for 22 years, and there was something in the way Lara Demosela used the emitter, the small practiced adjustment, the complete absence of drama, that struck him as a more significant data point than anything he'd observed in his career. Most people, given weapons-grade access to physical reality, adjusted something large. The emitters have a combined field range of approximately 3 kilometers, he said. At director-level output, they could theoretically restructure the internal architecture of any vessel within that radius. Lara looked at him over her cup. I know, she said, and you're using them for tea. The tea is real, she said. A ship's architecture can be negotiated. In the vents, the consortium pulsed again. This time the sensation it sent was slightly different, less like disapproval, and more like the feeling of watching someone solve a problem correctly and resenting that you couldn't find a flaw in the solution. Lara decided to interpret this as a compliment. Crudo Velsh found out about the Nerve Dragon on a Thursday, which was already a bad day because Thursdays were when the quarterly laundering reports were due, and the reports were consistently more complicated than they should have been, which was itself a consequence of having destroyed the primary records archive 3 years ago by feeding it to a Nerve Dragon and then selling the ship without thinking about the fact that the Nerve Dragon was still on the ship. It's still on the ship, said Marat Dolch, his operational second, who had a gift for stating the problem at the exact moment when it was least useful to have it stated. I know it's still on the ship, Crudo said. I'm the one who told you it was still on the ship. Someone bought the ship. Someone bought the ship, Crudo agreed. A human woman! A human woman, he agreed again, with the decreasing patience of a man being walked through information he already possessed. The Verdant Lapid's registration has been transferred. The Institute's educational system is broadcasting active enrollment signals, which means someone activated the classroom, Crudo said. He sat back, he looked at the ceiling. The dragon is awake. The dragon is awake, Marat confirmed. The silence between them had the quality of 2 people calculating the same number and arriving at the same answer. The Nerve Dragon, Specimen 4 Gamma, contained in its filament network the cumulative data residue of everything it had consumed over 4 years of active use on the Verdant Lapid. Not stored with any retrievable structure, not organized in any way that a standard data recovery system could access. but a sufficiently specialized extraction team, working with the right equipment and enough time, could filter the residue, pull coherent fragments from the processed remains of the financial records the Dragon had destroyed. 3 systems worth of laundering records. If those records surfaced, if anyone with legal authority understood what the Dragon contained and got it to an extraction specialist, Crudo Velsch's operation across 3 solar systems would collapse in roughly the time it took to file the relevant warrants. "We need the Dragon back," he said. "Or we need to make sure no one extracts it." "Same solution," Crudo said. "We go get it." Marit had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. The new owner's director-level certification gives her weapons system access through the ship's educational infrastructure. The woman bought a decommissioned gangster ship and happened to pass a galactic science class. She's not a weapons operator. The Institute's system logged a Category 9 containment event. She de-escalated it, without assistance. Crudo Velsch looked at Marit Dolch for a long time. "She tamed the dragon," Marit said. "People don't tame nerve dragons. The log says otherwise." Another silence. "Fine," Crudo said. "We go in with full suppression gear, we disable the ship's emitter network before she can activate it, and we recover the specimen. Quick and clean. She's one human woman on a ship by herself." He stood up. "How difficult can it be?" In the history of underestimating single human women on ships by themselves, this sentence would later be identified by Marit Dolch's post-operational report as the precise moment things began to go wrong. The Verdant Lapid's proximity sensors registered the approaching vessel at a range of 9 kilometers, which gave Lara 22 minutes of warning. She was in Bay 7, reviewing the curriculum notes that Siveth Oran had assembled for Unit 7 when Pedag 9 interrupted with the proximity alert. "Unregistered vessel on intercept course," he announced. "Current trajectory consistent with boarding approach." Lara looked at the alert data, recognized the vessel class, a suppression-fitted tactical transport, which was not a common thing to own unless your professional activities benefited from having one. She pulled the thread on her sleeve once. Thought. "PDEG 9, she said. "When the Verdant Lapid's emitter network detects an electromagnetic suppression field directed at the ship, what happens?" PDEG 9 consulted his archive. "Director-level protocol. The emitter network interprets external suppression attempts as a hostile environmental event and activates counter-field generation automatically. Documented in the Series 8 Installation Manual, Section 22, Protection of Educational Infrastructure. So if they try to disable the emitters from outside, the emitters activate at director-level default output." Lara nodded. She then did several things in quick succession. She repositioned Specimen 4 Gamma's containment field, the one PDAG 9 had helped her configure properly 2 days after the initial incident, with Siveth Oran supervising and muttering increasingly alarmed notes into his recording apparatus to cover the full lower deck. She adjusted the environmental systems to close the internal pressure hatches on decks 2 and 3, which left the midship docking collar as the only viable entry point. And she made herself a fresh cup of tea, because if something was going to happen in the next 20 minutes, she wanted it to happen with a properly heated cup. The consortium pulsed from the vents. This time the sensation was unmistakable. It felt, as best as Lara could interpret the fungal emotional vocabulary she'd been developing over 3 weeks, like anticipation. "Don't get excited," she said. "I'm not planning anything complicated." Siveth Oran, who had materialized at the classroom interface when the proximity alert sounded, was watching her with an expression that had evolved significantly from his initial shock of the week before. It was now something closer to cautious professional interest. "You should know," he said, "that the people likely aboard that vessel understand what the Dragon contains." "I figured," Lara said. "They'll want to either retrieve it or destroy it." "I know. You understand that the data residue in the Dragon's filament network is evidence of serious criminal activity across 3 systems." Lara looked at him. "You knew that." "I suspected it when I reviewed the specimen's intake history during my initial post-event documentation." Siveth Oran had the particular composure of someone who had been a government-affiliated academic long enough to know how to be precise without being cornered. The Institute's policy is to report suspected illegal use of registered specimens to the relevant authorities. I have already filed a flag with the Galactic Regulatory Commission. Lara stared at him. When did you do that? 4 days ago? 4 days ago you filed a regulatory report and didn't tell me. You were completing Unit 5. I didn't want to interrupt the curriculum. Lara set down her tea. She pulled the thread on her sleeve so hard it actually came loose. She looked at the small piece of thread in her hand, then set it on the student station beside her. So the authorities are already aware, she said. Our response team is currently en route, Siveth-Oran confirmed. Estimated arrival 16 minutes. The incoming vessel's suppression field hit the Verdant Lapid's hull. All 6 emitters activated simultaneously. The effect, from the perspective of Crudo Velsh's tactical transport, was presumably startling. The Verdant Lapid's educational reality distortion field expanded outward at director-level output, calibrated for immersive xenobiological simulation environments designed to make a moderate-sized room feel like it contained several hectares of Solvex 4 wilderness. Applied at full output to the space between 2 ships, it created a zone of perceptual compression that made navigation instruments report spatial positions roughly 30 meters off from their actual location. Crudo Velsh's boarding team, deployed in 2 units through the docking collar, arrived in the main salon of the Verdant Lapid with the navigational confidence of people whose equipment had just quietly lied to them about where everything was. Lara was sitting in the main salon in the most comfortable chair, which happened to also be structurally sound. She had her tea. Specimen 4 Gamma was not in the room, but its containment field extended through the lower deck directly below, and its feeding signal, the soft amber glow of a satisfied nerve dragon, was visible through the floor panels as a warm underlighting that made the whole room look like it was sitting above a hearth. The 6 people who came through the docking collar were wearing tactical suppression suits and carrying equipment designed to neutralize biological specimens. They stopped when they saw her. She didn't say anything. This, it turned out, was more effective than most things she could have said. "Where is the specimen?" said the person at the front of the group, whom Lara assessed as the person in charge based on the fact that he was speaking and everyone else was watching him. "Below us," Lara said, sleeping. "We're here to recover it." "I know." She drank her tea. "It's registered to this ship. As of 3 weeks ago, this ship is mine, the specimen is mine, and the Institute has already filed a regulatory report about the data residue in its filament network, which means every piece of evidence the Dragon consumed is now a pending legal exhibit." She set the cup down. "So if you're planning to destroy it, you're planning to destroy evidence in a Galactic Regulatory Commission proceeding. And if you're planning to take it, you're planning to take registered property from a certified elite pedagogical director in an active Institute installation, which is a federal offense in the 7 systems that recognize the Institute's charter." She paused. "I know 7 sounds like not many, but 3 of them are your systems. Crudo Velsh, because it was in fact Crudo Velsh at the front of the group, which Marit Dolch had advised against, and which Crudo had insisted on because he had wanted to see the Dragon and was now questioning that decision, looked at the woman in the chair, the warm amber glow under the floor, and the small obsolete robot in the corner that had just quietly said something about armamento verbal no conventional category 8. "You did this on purpose," he said. "I drank tea," Lara said. "Your professor did the hard part." Behind her, Siveth-Oran's hologram had materialized, standing in the posture he used when he was about to summarize a lesson. He had, it was true, done quite a bit of the hard part. He had also spent 2 sleepless processing cycles composing a report that was, professionally, the most significant filing of his career, and he was experiencing an emotion that his programming classified as professional satisfaction, and that he suspected was actually something warmer than that. The Galactic Regulatory Commission response team arrived through the docking collar 14 minutes later, 2 minutes faster than Siveth-Oran's estimate, because the lead investigator had been tracking Crudo Velsh for 8 months and had moved quickly when the Institute flag landed in her queue. The processing took 6 hours. All things considered, it was the most orderly 6 hours the Verdant Lapid had seen in its operational history. Crudo Velsh and his team were escorted off the ship by the Commission's investigators, who were also very interested in speaking with PDAG-9 as a documented witness to the events of the preceding weeks. PDAG-9 provided a complete time-stamped record of all relevant classroom proceedings, including at no one's request a running classification of the threat level of each sentence uttered by all parties during the investigation interview. The lead investigator eventually asked him, with professional restraint, to stop. PDAG-9 classified her request as Armamento Verbal No Conventional, Category 3, and complied. Sivitharan filed his formal incident report with the Institute, 14 pages, 3 appendices on the dietary behavior of specimen 4 gamma under non-standard feeding conditions. The Institute's review board sent a preliminary response within 2 hours, which was unprecedented in his experience. They expressed significant interest in publishing the findings and asked whether the current director of Bay 7 Didactic would be available for a formal consultation. Sivitharan consulted Lara about this message. She considered it for a moment. "Tell them I charge consulting fees," she said. Sivitharan stared at her. "You're going to charge the Institute." "I just tamed their specimen and held the evidence chain for an active regulatory case," Lara said. "Yes, I'm going to charge the Institute." He sent the response. The Institute replied within 20 minutes, which told both of them something useful about how interested they actually were. Late in the afternoon, when the ship had returned to its normal quiet, a quiet Lara had learned over 3 weeks to read as layered rather than empty. The hum of the emitters running at low output, the subsonic comfort vocalization of specimen 4 gamma, rising faintly through the floor, the particular texture of the consortium's passive ambient judgment in the vents. She went back down to Bay 7. She sat in the bad chair out of habit, then realized she didn't have to, and moved to a different one, a sturdy one. She sat in it for a moment, testing whether it felt wrong. It didn't. It just felt like a chair. Sivitharan materialized at the interface. He had been doing this more often in the last week, showing up without a pedagogical pretext, which his programming flagged as non-standard behavior, and which he had begun to suspect was simply what it looked like when he was curious about something. "You could leave," he said. "Now that the legal situation is resolved, there's no active threat keeping you here." "I know," Lara said. "The Institute consultation will likely require some travel. You could base from anywhere." The life support certification loop has been formally broken now that the Commission has documented the ship's modified operational status. You don't technically have to complete the curriculum. Lara had been looking at the containment field where specimen 4 gamma was sleeping, the warm amber pulse of it, slow and steady as a heartbeat. "PDAG-9, she said. "Present. What's Unit 7? PDAG-9 retrieved the document. "Unit 7, Advanced Cognitive Fauna Behavioral Studies. Prerequisite, Unit 6 completion. Topics include communication methodologies, environmental enrichment, feeding habit regulation, and long-term care protocols for intelligence class specimens." "Is there a lab component?" "All units have a lab component." Lara looked at Sivitharan. He had the expression he'd had when she made the T adjustment with the emitter, the one he didn't quite know what to do with. "You're going to take Unit 7, he said. "I own a dragon," Lara said. "I should probably know what I'm doing." In the vents, the consortium pulsed. This time it felt unmistakably like the reluctant acknowledgement that someone had finally made a reasonable decision. She called the Institute consultant back that evening and quoted a number she had calculated. By considering her hourly rate as a freelance neurochemista, the risk premium for active Category 9 specimen management, and the consulting rate the Institute's own published guidelines suggested for non-standard field discoveries, the number was large enough that there was a brief silence on the other end of the connection. "We'll need to review that with the finance department," the consultant said. "Take your time," Lara said, and ended the call. She went to the main salon and programmed the lighting sequence she ran every night, the one that made the shadows move at the right intervals, the ones that suggested, to the peripheral vision of someone sitting in the dark, that the ship was less empty than it was. She'd built the pattern in her first week aboard, before the classroom, before the dragon, before any of it. She still ran it. She noticed, sitting there with her tea at the right temperature, that she was running it less automatically now, less like a reflex and more like a preference. The distinction felt small and was not. Specimen 4 Gamma's vocalization came up through the floor, slow, warm, the sound of something large and content settling in for the night. The consortium pulsed once from the vents, just once, quiet, almost companionable. Pedeg 9, from somewhere in the lower deck, said into the empty corridor, "Day's end summary, threat level of all recorded statements, declining. Armamento verbal, non-conventional activity, reduced. Assessment, subject Lara Demosele is currently operating within normal parameters." A pause. Reclassification. Subject Lara Demosele has no established normal parameters. Recommend continued monitoring. Another pause. Note appended. Continued monitoring is technically the function of this unit, therefore continuing. Lara smiled, not broadly, just enough met the ceiling. "Good night, Pedeg 9, she said. "Good night, Director Demosele," said the robot, who was not designed to say good night and did so anyway. The shadows moved through the salon in their programmed pattern. Outside, the stars were indifferent and plentiful, and the verdant lapid flew on through them. A gangster's ship turned classroom turned home, carrying a divorced woman, an obsolete robot, a telepathic fungi colony with strong opinions about interior design, a holographic professor 22 years into a career he hadn't expected to still find interesting, and one nerve dragon of considerable appetite that had recently